Dear student, today our topic is the historical overview of environmentalism, ecologism and green politics. Before we move on to the main themes of our project, let us discuss certain definition. The word environment is basically derived from the French word environ, that means to surround or to enclose. Therefore, environment is basically the surrounding where we reside. While the word environmentalism denotes certain activities or philosophy that advocates the protection of our environment through legislature or democratic means. While the word green politics refers to the emerging political philosophy that also advocates protecting or safeguarding environment through democratic, political and other legal methods. Emerging in the 1970s, the Green parties are now controlling several important legislature portfolios in different parts of Europe. However, Green parties or green politics doesn't necessarily limited to legislature or democratic means. It is also manifested through several environmental movements that we presently see in our current global affairs. So, before coming to these environmental movements, let us first discuss the major threats to our environment that this environmentalist or ecologist mainly addresses to. The first threat is the rapid increase of population. Today, our Earth hosts around 7.4 billion of population. But it is to be remembered that more number of people means more number of resources to sustain them. But Earth is a finite place and resources are limited. Thus, in the post-1800 industrial phase, we find lots of resources are being depleted for search of raw material and to sustain the growing population and our industries. One of the major depletion is in the minerals, fuels and also timber. In fact, that's why our proverb states that in the entire universe, wood is more rare and valuable than diamond. The next is waste and pollution. It is to be noted that whatever we do, there is a byproduct of waste material. But is there enough space to dump this waste material? Is there enough activities to recycle these waste materials? No. And as a result, more number of production means more number of waste generation, and there is a shortage of space for dumping this waste. In recent times, electronic waste is a major threat and which are not decomposable. Lastly, combustion of fossil fuels, as we all know, it is one of the still remains the primary threat to our environment. Large number of harmful gaseous substances which are produced from the combustion of fossil fuels like petroleum and coal is causing greenhouse effects. These gases include carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, methane and also sulfur dioxide. Greenhouse effects basically leads to the gradual increase of temperature, which in turn also accelerates the melting of glacial ice and polar ice caps that led to increase of sea level. Thus, these threats, if not addressed right now, can lead to a huge calamity in the near future. Now we move on to the history of environmentalism and global environmental movements. There are two prevalent narratives to discuss the environmentalism. or the development of environmental movements. The first is the imperialist view and the second is counter-imperialist view. Certain authors who are supporters of imperialist view like Richard Grove, whose famous book is Green Imperialism, advocates that scientific forest conservation or scientific environmental protection emerged only in the post-industrial phase in modern Europe. They said that before industrialization or before the coming of Western Renaissance philosophy, humans used to exploit nature unprecedentedly. There was no law or restriction to prevent their activities. It is only with this modern European science that scientific forestry developed, enroachment is limited, and forests are being protected or reserved. For example, the forest law which are being introduced by the British government in India during the 19th century. While the counter-imperialist view neglects this claim, one of the primary advocate of this view is Ramchandra Guha and Madhav Gadgil, who in their ironic work, This Fisherland, said that Europe or the coming of this post-industrial scientific forestry is basically an ecological watershed, particularly for the colonies. They said that before coming of this Western industrial modernism, man and nature maintained a symbiotic relationship. Yes, human exploited the forest, but this is not such a level of exploitation that the forests are being cleared. Rather, with coming of industrial boom, lots of natural resources are just cutted down, devastated to meet the demand of Western industries. Tribal and peasant lands are confiscated and forest became a commodity to exploit for Western industrialism. However, both of their claims seems to be downpoured since environmental problems and environmentalism was there still since our ancient days. As we all know, one of the primary factors behind the downfall of the great Indus Valley civilization is the gradual increase of desertification and the gradual advancement of the thawed desert. Archaeologists like Gurmeet Singh from the study of pollen grains said that if this dry climate would not have advanced, Indus Valley civilization might have continued. The fallacy here is that why is this drier climate coming in? It is because, as many archaeologists believe, for the over-exploitation of the Harappan people on the environment. They have destroyed the timber covering, they have embanked the rivers and have exploited the river in the environment to such an extent that there was environmental calamity, rainfall declined and drier climate came in and entire civilization got washed off. Similar traits are found not only in India but also in the ancient civilization of China, Babylonia and Greece. The Greek people used to cut timber mainly to warm up their homes in cold season, but they have exploited the timber covering to such an extent that there remained no forest to be cut down and they had to build their house to utilize solar power for warming up. Thus, in view of these environmental problems, concern for our environment was found in our ancient texts and ancient books. In ancient India, cleaning up of the environment was the essence of Vedic culture. Our Vedic philosophy advocates several natural resources like forest, its animals as spiritual places of great spiritual importance. Although there was not the concept of pollution, but the Rig Vedic peoples were aware that cutting trees might pollute or poison the environment. I will quote a particular sloka from Rig Veda which tells, "Do not harm the environment, do not harm the water and the flora. The earth is my mother, I am her son. May the waters remain fresh. Do not harm the waters, do not cut the trees, else it will pollute the environment." So it basically speaks how much essence or importance was of environment is manifested in our ancient text. Now coming to the gradual rise of environment in other parts of the world, mention should be made of Edward I, the King of England. In 1306, he was the first to ban or prohibit the burning of sea coal due to excessive air pollution and which is causing respiratory hazards and diseases. His successor, Henry V and Richard II, followed his footsteps, and particular legislatures were introduced by which sea coal burning, if some person is being caught burning sea coal, might be arrested and been executed also. However, the real paradigm shift came during the Industrial Revolution, which completely changed the human-nature relationship. To meet the growing industrial demand and the boom of population, large amount of natural resources were unprecedentedly utilized and extracted. One of them is timber and another is coal, which are mostly used for fuel. But due to indiscriminate cutting of trees, the tree cover and the forest cover of Europe started rapidly depleting. By 1800, England and Wales, which have 90% of tree cover, is now decreased to 17% only. The Black Forest of Germany and other important forests like the Utenbach forest, etc., started to disappear. However, industrialization cannot stop. Natural resources needs to be extracted. So where would they come from? So now they ventured for the forest of their colonies, particularly India. And thus by beginning of 1800s, large trunks of timbers, large tonnages of timbers are just cut down and were utilized mainly for the shipbuilding industries and for the sleepers of railway industries. But there should be reminded that the Britishers are foreign or alien to these colonies. They doesn't know the knowledge of where or which timber should be extracted, which is free of water corrosion, and where they are available. So they need a compound called scientific forestry, by which all forests are surveyed down and are protected to meet the colonial demand. Thus by 1878 laws, entire Indian forests are divided into three categories. One, the reserve forest, which is for colonial use, the protected forest, which would be used for later purpose, and the community forest, which the Indians can use. Historians like Ramchandra Guha or Madhav Gadgil says that this basically makes the Indian forest a commodity and restricted the tribal and people relationship with their age-old forest. Forestry became such a huge business that the colonial state started earning huge revenues from this timber felling. So much so that Superintendent of Forest D. Brandeis said that forestry in India is a business which is dependent more on mathematics, less on botany. Thus, the Indian environmental movements can be classified into three stages. One is the pre-colonial phase, second is the colonial phase, and the third is the post-colonial phase. Pre-colonial phase environmentalism we have already discussed during our Vedic period. But it should be mentioned that in medieval days also, there are lots of environmental movements which are chiefly manifested by the peasant rebellions. The Delhi Sultanate and Mughal Empire brought about huge clearance of forest area for their agricultural expansion. And since once these agricultural lands are now confiscated, they imposed huge taxation. Alauddin Khilji, for example, increased the agrarian tax to 50% of the total production, while even the free grazing and the free movements of the cattle flocks in the grasslands are also restricted and taxes are imposed culturalized. As a result, huge peasant movements or large number of peasant resistance are found in this era. However, the real paradigm shift, as we already said, came during the colonial phase. Here, one thing should be discussed about the role of evangelical or Christian missionaries. Now, forest was basically a place of spiritual importance for the tribals. They respected forest and thus protected forest as their own god or mother. The Britishers who need to enrose this forest knew that if they enrose this forest, they might be resisted by the tribes. Hence, they utilized the Christian missionaries who would enrose these tribal lands and would directly change their worldview of the tribes, and now it can easily be engrossed or intruded by the colonial missionaries to exploit natural resources and also colonial fiscal and revenue system. Coming to the early conservation laws of protecting environment, the early conservation laws are not found in England, rather was first found in British America, or to mention British North America. 1626, 1639 and 1681, three legislation were made protecting wildlife and forest. In England or Britain, there was a custom of hunting songbirds for merrymaking, and as a result, lots number of songbirds started to be extinct. Two primary example was the passenger pigeon and the great auk. To protect these songbirds, in 1883, a legislation was passed by which hunting of any birds or bird species is totally prohibited. With the coming of 20th century, the world witnessed the two great wars, World War I and World War II. And they found that how much environmental degradation or destruction, to be proper, can be caused by human activity or human warfare. As a result, there was a growing concern to protect environment. First in 1955, due to the growing smog problem in Pennsylvania, New York and London, Air Control Conference was held. The Environmental Protection Agency or EPA was established, which advocated certain measures to protect environment like using catalytic converter, good treatment of sewage and also checking nuclear emissions. In this regard, mention should be made of the United Nations Conference or Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. Here, the world leaders for the first time met among each other and chalked out the threats or the current threats to our environment. They have, for the first time, chalked down certain concepts like greenhouse effect, global warming, and the residence of world glaciers, which needs to be checked, else the world might face natural calamity in the near future. Now let us discuss global environmentalism and green politics. There are two waves of global environmentalism. The first wave is basically led by scientists, philosophers and literaturists during the 19th century who criticized the rapid industrialization and exploitation of natural resources. They propagated three ideas for their views. One is back to the land, second is scientific conservation, and the third is idea of wilderness. Various poets and literaturists like Shelley, Wordsworth, etc. also joined this movement, who paint down in their writing how man's greed is destroying the beauty of nature. In USA, the first wave of environmentalism was sparked by the book named Man and Nature, written by George Perkins Marsh in 1864. Scientists and philosophers and activists started making the populace aware that how deforestation and environmental exploitation is related to drought, famines, and other natural calamities. In this respect, the African Conference should also be mentioned. All of us know that by 1900s, the whole of Africa was basically balkanized between several European powers who are indiscriminately using Africa's natural resources for their own economy. In 1900, in London, in the African Conference, there was first precedence of certain laws which would safeguard Africa's wildlife. It provokes or advocated that no hunting would be there without permission. It would designate particular places for particular species, would protect certain areas for game activities where agriculture or mining would be prohibited, and certain regions would be declared as national parks. While in the second wave of environmentalism, which started mostly in the post-World War phase, growing concern was there for environment, and people understood that if this pace continued, there would be a huge calamity. And thus, growing concern for enacting legislations is there. People are also aware how to reduce non-renewable energy sources and replace them with renewable energy. The post-1950s environmentalism, naturalists tended to enact certain government laws, but they find that they are producing huge failure. Hence, they started manifesting themselves with huge movements and demonstrations. In this regard, I should mention two important environmental movements, or we can say environmental calamities also, in modern India. The first is the Chipko movement. In 1973, in Upper Himalayan province, which is presently Uttarakhand, the growing deforestation provoked environmental activist Sundarlal Bahuguna to undergo the Chipko movement, by which the activist will basically hug the tree and in a symbolic manner to protect them from uprooting. Chipko movement gained popularity in the 1970s and spread up in different parts of India, provoking more number of environmental movements. Last but not least is the Bhopal gas tragedy, which happened in December 3 in 1984. In the factory of Union Carbide in Bhopal, there was a leakage of a very poisonous gas known as methyl isocyanate, which led to the death of around 5,000 people in Bhopal in a single night. By far, it is one of the largest industrial and environmental disaster in the world, and the largest industrial disaster in India also. Bhopal gas tragedy noted us or showed us how if we don't take proper precaution to safeguard our environment from industrial waste or industrial enrichment, how much calamity it might lead for the destruction of humankind. Now let us discuss the rise of ecologism and its difference with environmentalism. Ecologism is a growing radical movement across the world. Although most people use the word environmentalism and ecologism interchangeably, but yet there remains some fundamental difference between the two. While environmentalism believes that dangers to our environment can be tackled within the established framework of society, politics, and legislature, ecologism, or the advocates of ecologism, believes that the existing framework of politics cannot tackle the environmental degradation. Hence, a thorough change or a thorough transformation of the entire social and political order is needed to tackle this environmental degradation or ecological disaster. As we have already stated in the earlier paragraphs, rise of ecologism led to the emergence of very radical movements of political ideology called the Green Parties, who openly advocated radical changes to counter environmental problems. They not only represented themselves in legislature but also in different activism and demonstration or violent movements. One of the very example of advocates of ecologism in present day is Greta Thunberg. In the 1990s, with the collapse of Soviet socialism and bankruptcy of intellectual socialism, many left-wingers joined this green politics, and green ecologism or green politics, the advocate of ecologism, gained ground. Among the ecologists or the supporters of ecologism, the dark greens believe in the most radical form of ecologism. They advocated strict punishment for polluters and environmental disasters and support a move which would take the society away from consumerism and industrialization. They even advocated the total suspension of several development projects, saying that they might destroy our environment. One of the major themes of this ecologism which needs to be discussed is their support for the radical or drastic control of Earth's population. Greatly influenced by Thomas Malthus' principle of population written in 1798, they believe that the Earth has reached its saturation point in terms of population. They took Earth as a spaceship, and thus in order for the survival of this spaceship, the number of passengers should be decreased. Hence, they advocated drastic measures for population control, and if we look in the history, they have hugely supported China's one-child policy, and even certain green ecologists have supported the compulsory sterilization process which was there in India during the emergency period of Indira Gandhi regime. And they in fact advocated other more authoritarian ways to control our population. But however, question still emerges or still remains whether drastic changes would save our environment. Should we compromise with our development projects? We cannot compromise or totally stop our development projects or infrastructure developments. However, protecting environment is also necessary. So in these terms or in this regard, what should be the proper way to protect our environment? In conclusion, thus we can say that neither we can stop the development of human civilization, nor we can compromise with the safeguarding of environment. Rather, we should follow an equable process where both can continue. Thus, we should follow a sustainable way of development where development will continue, protecting environment. One of the very important example which we can give is constructing various tunnels in forest lands by which roads will pass without destroying the wildlife activity. Thus, in our conclusion, we should advocate the sustainable way of development.